Hello, good evening, welcome, and my name is Zihan, and it is my pleasure tonight to walk you guys, all of you, through this lesson 5 on Buddhism. And before we start, I just want to give you all a short story about, just a quick introduction on myself, which I believe is related to our lesson tonight. So, as many of you know, I was born and raised in China, and my biological parents were both Buddhists. And but when they got divorced, my mom came to the States, and God graciously opened her eyes to see the gospel of Jesus Christ. So now she's a believer. But my dad, my aunt, and my stepmom, and so pretty much all my family in China, they are still practicing Buddhists. So as I was preparing for this lesson, so by God's grace, I think I was protected from Buddhism in a way. I never personally practiced Buddhism, and because when I saw how my aunt and how my dad were doing it, there's something just didn't really hit me. It was like I just saw I thought, hey, Buddhism is really a self-centered religion. All the practices, all the things that you do, it's more like how to benefit yourself. And so I'd always had I always thought I was a pretty good person. So why would I take on Buddhism again to improve myself? So until I came to the States and I met a Savior who gave Himself for me. But I personally, I never really practiced Buddhism, and I never had any interest. However, since I was raised around a bunch of Buddhists, so I was definitely influenced by Buddhism a lot, and I heard a lot of stories. And I think just growing up in China, it's inevitable that you will encounter Buddhism in some ways, regardless of whether you like it or not. Speaking of China, I got a quick story for you. So I think it's fair to say when most people think of China or Chinese food, they would think of Panda Express, and I am not offended. And if your favorite dish is orange chicken, I like orange chicken, but just truth be told, it's not Chinese at all. It's very much Americanized, and nobody in China will ever eat that. Like, let me show you guys what is my favorite dish, and it might look a little strange to you. Just bear with me, okay? This is my favorite dish growing up, and when I showed this picture to Connor, he said that it looks like a bunch of worms, and but it's not. It's not worms. So this is actually fried eel. I know, a little better, right? And so, yeah. Well, okay. Before they were fried, they look like this, so it's way worse. Yeah. It's this eel. Like you don't catch them in. Well, maybe show this one. You don't catch them in the ocean, from the ocean. Usually, we call them the swamp eels. So they live in the rice fields. So usually, when rice farmers are planting rice in China, they would catch a couple of those in the rice fields, and so this is a very common food in China, and this also happened to be my favorite thing to eat when I was growing up. But one of the things, if you want to make this dish, one of the things it requires for the chef to do is that you have to catch them alive and kill them at the spot. And because it requires freshness, so you can't really kill it and then freeze it in the refrigerator for a couple of days. No, you need to cook it right away. So usually that means if you want to cook this dish, you have to know how to, kill this fish and how to clean it and everything, how to handle this. And the problem, so when I was growing up, my grandma, she was an expert in making this dish. And she, grandma's food is usually the best. We all love it. So she grew up making this for me all the time. But as I was growing, was growing up, getting a little older, my grandma started to make this food less and less. And I never thought about why. I just thought, oh, maybe grandma got tired, right? She's getting older. But later I found out it was actually my Buddhist aunt who had been telling my grandma, because in her belief system, every eel you killed is every life taken, right? So my grandma, I don't know how many of those eels she'd been killed, but my aunt was just like, Mom, you need to stop doing this. The more eel you kill, the more bad merit you're gonna get onto yourself, and it's bad for your karma, right? It's bad for your afterlife, well, your next life. So even as much as my grandmother was not a Buddhist, but because under my aunt's request, eventually she stopped making this. So the reason why I tell you guys this story is because I think this story really touches upon an important doctrine in Buddhism, which is karma. And I think if you understand karma well, it really would help you to understand Buddhism. So currently in the world, there's 3 major camps, if you were to say that, of Buddhism. The Theravada Buddhism, which is common in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma. And the other 2 are what I'm more familiar with, the Mahayana Buddhism and also the Tibetan Buddhism. And interestingly, even those 2 are pretty common in China. One kind of looked down upon the other. That's why one of them is called the larger vessel Buddhism, because this Buddhism is considered to be more of a sacrificial kind of Buddhism that is more universal. Like, people who practice this kind of Buddhism is more concerned about others, right? Concerned about delivering everyone else to nirvana. But the other kind of Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhism, is more focused on yourself, how you could become a Buddha. So one of the things I would like to share with you, at least this has been my experience, is that I think a lot of the Buddhist doctrines or Buddhist teachings are contradictory, and as we will see later. However, though, I think you've probably all have experienced, or you have all seen, that Buddhism has really gained a lot of popularity in the United States since the past couple of decades, especially in American colleges, and a lot of celebrities who are currently practicing Buddhists, right? Like I did some research. I found out that Richard Gere, he's a Buddhist, and Tiger Woods, he practices Buddhism, and also, unfortunately, George Lucas, he is a Buddhist. I recently just finished all the Star Wars series, and I realized, I was like, the language he uses really is very Buddhist, right? May the Force be with you, this idea of the Force, and also the restoration of the Force, it's very Buddhist. So next time you watch Star Wars, you know where his ideas came from. However, the reason why I show you all this verse is that if you just if you look at the Buddhist teachings, well, I don't think you could say the Buddhist teachings are evil. Like, I did a thorough research, and when you talk with a lot of the non-religious people or like non-Christians, one of the common objections they will have against Christianity is that, all religions teach people to do good, right? They'd be like, hey, what's the difference between Buddhism or Christianity if they all teach people to do good? Well, first of all, I don't think that's a true statement, as we are going to explore later in Islam. And I think a lot of the things said in the Quran are just straight out evil. So no, not all religions teach people to do good. But also, I think even if you look at the teachings of Buddhism, I think it really reminded me of this verse where Paul says, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, and therefore it is not surprising if his ministers also disguise themselves as ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their deeds. Well, like in this passage, Paul is talking about those false apostles, but I think you could apply that to a lot of the false religions a lot of the religions in this world. Is that they might look like really good on the surface, but they don't really lead you to the truth in the end. Like we said before, I just want to, there's a very key practice that a lot of Chinese Buddhists do. It's called life release. And so what is life release? So life release is a practice of relieving animals held captive with the presumed intention of saving their lives if they were destined to slaughter. So like, as I showed you guys earlier, in China, we eat a bunch of weird foods, and we also eat a lot of wild animals. People eat like goats and eat snakes. We eat frogs. And so for Buddhists, slaughtering them is just an abomination. So a common practice for Buddhists to do is that they would take those animals from people who captured them and release them into the wilderness. And the reason why is that they would, by doing that, they would gain merit and gain good karma in the afterlife. So I just found a video that I thought was really interesting that talks about this idea of life release. So here's a fun video I found on life release, the practice of life release, and ultimately the goal of life release is to gain merit in order for you to have a better karma. And you might wonder, hey, what does the word karma mean? Well, so karma is the most fundamental doctrine in Buddhism. Karma is the idea of how you live your life will determine the quality of your life you have after your reincarnation. So remember, this karma isn't really manifested in this life as long as you're living. But all of it, it's kind of like your 401k, right? Like you're working towards something so you can draw it in the next life. And so if you're unselfish, if you are kind, if you've done so many good things, if you give money to the Buddhist monks, such as stuff like that, you will be rewarded by being reincarnated into a pleasant life. However, if you live a life of selfishness and evil, you've done everything wrong, therefore you will be reincarnated into a less than pleasant lifestyle. And so in this system, being reincarnated into a less pleasant lifestyle could not only mean that you will become a lesser person next life, but also you could be reincarnated into like a fish or even a tree or something like that. So nobody wants it. So in other words, so you would reap in the next life what you sow in this life. And karma is basically just based on the theological belief in reincarnation. And I remember there was once my dad, he told me this story. So he said that he knew a Buddhist monk. And one day, someone called this monk to come over to his house because he just been really sick. And he said, hey, I've visited so many doctors, right? I tried everything. I took medicines, but I'm just still sick. Hey, can you come over and bless me? And so this monk, he went over to his house. And this house, this guy, he owned a house in the suburbs, and also he had a pond in his backyard. So this monk, he kind of walked around the house to see, what is really wrong with your feng shui, right? Like if there's anything I could do with you. And in the end, and he concluded with this. So he told this guy, he's like, hey, you know what happened? Last week, you ate a fish. And then this fish is actually reincarnation of your father. and so you did this great wrong. That's why you're being punished for this, sin or this abomination that you did because you ate your father. This is a great wrong. So now you will be sick for the rest of your life. Well, so that's just how people believe. That's how the idea of reincarnation is being played out in Buddhism. And let me read you guys this quote because I think it explains a lot about this idea of karma and how people believe it. So it reads like this: "What is the cause of the inequality that exists among mankind? Why should one person be brought up in the lap of luxury, endowed with fine moral and physical qualities, and another in absolute poverty, steeped in misery? Why should one person be a mental prodigy and another an idiot? Why should one person be born with saintly characteristics and another with criminal tendencies? Why should some be linguistic, artistic, mathematically inclined, or musical from the very cradle? Why should others be cognitively blind, deaf, or deformed? Why should some be blessed and others cursed from their births?" So this is kind of like a poem-ish article that really explains a lot of how people would face of, Buddhists try to explain the ideas of why some people born out to have such a wonderful life, but why would some born with just deformed? Why are they born blind? Why are they deaf? Well, it's not necessarily because they did something wrong in this life, but it all traces back to the previous life this person lived. So if this person was doing all sorts of evil things, so karma would be paying him back in this life by bringing all kinds of bad fortune onto him. But if you were somehow working out really good, you were doing all sorts of wonderful things, and then in this life, karma is going to reward you for just making your life much better. And I've also heard about this idea karma being played out between parents and children. So for example, if I have kids and I try really well in this life, and so that means karma is going to bless my children in the next life. However, if I'm a really bad parent, I'm doing all sorts of evil things, not only will I be punished, but also my karma will carry over to my kids. And still, to this day, I think my dad believes that the reason why I'm in America and I attended some really prestigious American colleges is because of he's got a good karma. It's not because his previous life that he worked hard enough, so that now the blessings are carried over into this life. So he still thinks he's blessing me in a way. So this is the idea of karma. Any questions we have so far about this, what we have talked about? Yes? That is a great question. And, the strictest Buddhists would not eat meat because, eating meat would require the killing, right, taking of a life. However, in some of the Tibetan Buddhists, it's really difficult for people to grow vegetables in Tibet because the height, right, is so tall and it's so high, and it's also very dry in Tibet, so people can't really grow vegetables. So somehow they created this idea called clean meat. Clean meat meaning like the animal was butchered by someone else. So like you didn't kill the animal, so you could go to a market and buy the animals and then you cook it up. So somehow it you won't incur the bad merit onto yourself. So unfortunately, that's what they believe. And my dad is a Buddhist. He eats meat. And my aunt, she is a Buddhist, but she wouldn't. So I guess really it's kind of by choice that like how it's really it's really by choice. Depends on your conscience. If you're convicted that you only should eat meat, you only should eat vegetables, you would do that. But I think a lot of Buddhists, they have no problem just eating meat. So, yes, Tai. Yeah, that is a great question because Buddha himself, so the founder of the religion, he's atheist. So he didn't believe in God, and he himself confessed that he is not God. Although I think in the following years, people kind of made him to be God, but if you really follow his teachings, he would say like, hey, I'm not God, I'm just a teacher. And I think Tai, you hit on a really good point, is that this karma, really, I think they believe it's a force. It's an unintelligent being just kind of randomly tossing out blessings and cursings for people. But I think just logically speaking, right, like who is there to tell if you've done something morally right or wrong? There has to be a supremely judge, right, to judge people on their deeds. So, anyways, in conclusion, I don't think in Buddhism they believe in a supreme deity who is everlastingly present and who's all-knowing and who's all-powerful, who could, just judge people based on their behaviors. No, so there's not such a figure. Well, let me give you all just a brief history of the religion, because I firmly believe you will understand a lot about the religion by looking at its founder. So Buddha, it was not his original name. His original name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born an Indian prince between the 6th BC and the 4th BC. His parents sheltered him really well because they didn't really want him to see any of the sufferings in the kingdom. So he grew up as a prince, and he had everything, and he had no idea of what was going on in the kingdom. And however, according to himself, one day he had visions, one as a aged man, one of a vision of a sick man, the other a vision of a corpse, and the fourth vision is a vision of a monk. And after he received the fourth vision, he decided to go pursue this road of becoming a monk because he really admired the peacefulness that he saw in this monk. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. Buddha, or Siddhartha, he was married at a young age, and he had a wife, and I think he had a son. So after he had this vision, he decided to, unfortunately, abandon his family and to go and pursue this route of enlightenment. And so I think for nearly 6 years, he undertook very severe fastings and a lot of those practices. And I think he was fasting a lot, and there were times that he even passed out. And but none of this really worked out. So he was like, why is it, I tried all of that, why did I just not get the answer? But one day he seated himself under a Bodhi tree in the west central India, and he promised not to rise until he had attained the enlightenment. And after fighting off an evil spirit named Mara, and who tempted him with worldly comforts and desires, Siddhartha, or Buddha, finally reached enlightenment and becoming the Buddha, what we see today. And he was at age 35 when he reached enlightenment, supposedly. And from then on, he spent the rest of his life teaching others about Buddhism and how to achieve this kind of spiritual state of enlightenment. And when he passed away around 480 BC, his followers began to organize a religious movement. And around 3rd BC, India actually announced that Buddhism to be its state religion. So that's just a quick history of Buddha and who he was. And here are some of the key ethics and teachings of Buddhism. And some of you already asked me about it, but there's not a single canon of scripture in Buddhism, not like Christianity, that everybody holds to the one single book of the Bible. No, in Buddhism, there's different canons of scriptures, and they are all written in Sanskrit. And sorry, I don't really know much about them, but I think most of the Chinese Buddhists would follow the Chinese Buddhist canon. And so the teachings of the Buddha are called the dharmas, which is, you could understand it as the law of Buddha. So there are laws in Buddha. But the main thing that Buddha taught was that wisdom, kindness, patience, generosity, and compassion are very important virtues. And in Buddhism, I don't think there's the idea of sin, or at least you can't use the language of sin, but there's definitely moralities. There are good things that you can do that will merit you good karma, and then there's definitely bad things you do to incur bad karma on you. And there's 5 big immoralities, I think, in the general category. Number 1 is stealing, I think, killing, committing adultery, covetousness, and also drinking. And then the last one, I didn't even know until I studied this lesson, because my dad grew up drinking and he was intoxicated. I had to go to the hospital with him, but no one had ever told me, hey, it was like, hey, your dad actually did this great sin, like he had to, now his karma is bad or something. No, like I think a lot of the Buddhists I know, they all drink, they drink all they want, and with no convictions whatsoever. So this is one of the things of Buddhism, and we talked about this idea of karma. So the system of karma, I guess the benefits of the system of karma is that if you did a bad deed, all you need to do is just do more good deeds to kind of overcome your bad deeds. Like consider this scale, right? If the scale of bad deeds is really, it's really low, and then all you need to do is just to do a bunch of good deeds. And so that somehow your bad deeds will be overlooked. And for Buddha himself, he taught this idea of the 4 noble truths. And for him, since he didn't use the language of sin, but he did acknowledge the idea of sufferings. And I would say in Christianity, what we believe that we can see there's definitely sufferings in this world. So the number 1 noble truth is that there is sufferings in this world. The second noble truth is the origin of suffering. So why would people suffer? Why would we have sufferings? Well, for Buddha, the reason why we suffer is because of the inner desires that are unfulfilled, and because of the desires in us, such as covetousness, such as greed, anger, and all of those things. So the third noble truth is the truth that the cessation of suffering. How do you end suffering, right? This is another big part that Buddhism and Christianity are different. Is that what is your solution to stop suffering? Well, then this is the idea of nirvana coming in, right? Nirvana means extinguishing. So all Buddhists in their lives would be trying to attain nirvana, which means reaching enlightenment. And this means the extinguishing of 3 fires of greed, delusion, and hatred. And someone who has attained enlightenment is filled, after he's reached enlightenment, would be filled with compassion for all living things. And there's a quote that I found. I found this quote on the BBC that talks about the second truth of the origin of suffering. It says this: our day-to-day troubles may seem to have easily identifiable causes: thirst, pain from an injury, sadness from the loss of a loved one. And in the second of his noble truths, though, the Buddha claimed to have found the cause of all suffering, and it is much more deeply rooted than our immediate worries. The Buddha taught that the root of all suffering is desire. So it's really interesting that Buddha would include thirst in one of the desires. So if you're thirsty, you need water. That's because you have this unlimited desires that you need to deal with, which is pretty interesting. One of the really interesting things that I learned about Buddhism is the idea of that they believe in heaven and hell. Although it's in a different sense of Christianity, because their idea of heaven and hell is temporary, other than in Christianity we have an eternal blessing and eternal judgment. So the Buddhist concept of heaven and hell is that those who go to hell can actually work themselves upward by making use of the merit that they had acquired previously. And there are no locks of the gates of hell. And hell is just a temporary place, and there's no reason for those beings to suffer there forever. And heaven is a temporary place where those have done good deeds experience more sensual pleasures for the longer period. And hell is just another temporary place where those evildoers experience more physical and mental suffering. So if we dig deeper into this idea of the temporary heaven and hell, really I think what we see is alongside with the idea of reincarnation is the idea of a second chance, right? If you've done a lot of things wrong in this life and your good deeds is not enough, you have not done enough good deeds to cover your bad deeds, well, if you have to go to hell, don't worry about it, right? You still get a second chance. You can work in hell that one day, if you accumulated enough good deeds, you can get yourself out of there. And this is the idea, I think the same idea as reincarnation too. Let's talk a little bit about the practice use of the Buddhist religion. And well, I would say in general that Buddhists are not very active in their social and political duties. According to the Buddhist teachings, Buddhist is supposed to draw back from the society, not to be very engaged in the society, right? Focusing on your own nirvana. However, there are, like I said, remember we talked about earlier about Buddhism being a very contradictory religion. So the most prominent Buddhist figure in this world right now, right? The Dalai Lama, as I was sharing with a friend earlier, that he was like the king of Tibet, that he owned lands and that he had all the political powers. Actually, all the government officials listened to him. And the reason why he is in exile in India is because he had a huge clash with the Communist Party. Like he would not submit his authority over to the Chinese Communist Party, aka the government. So he actually had to flee to India, and all Dalai Lamas has been staying in India ever since. So you could say that Buddhists are not generally involved in politics in the society, but also we have examples of the Dalai Lama who would very much do the opposite. And the other thing I want to talk about is the idea of kind of prosperity Buddhism. Is that like most people follow Buddhism not necessarily for want to become a Buddha, but more they are there for the blessings. I don't really have statistics, but I think most Chinese people, when everyone has visited a Buddhist temple, it doesn't really mean that, I have, and all my family members, they all have, but it doesn't really mean that we are Buddhist, but it's kind of like, what's the word, like if an American who goes to church on Christmas and Easter, or Christers, right? Someone told me that term today, Christers. So you go to you visit Buddhist temples really to show that, to ask for the blessings, right? You offer offerings, you go there to kind of get a taste of the supernatural power, and you come back with all the blessings. And I remember that when I was maybe 13 or 15, I was going through my middle school placement test, and my dad told me, we had a huge Buddhist shrine at our home, and my dad had this. Well, he said he was committed. He kowtowed while he bowed down to the Buddha shrine that had a huge Buddha statue. He bowed down to it 100 times a day, and the forehead would touch the floor and all that. I know that was his love, like his way of expressing his love for me. But eventually, he concluded that because he was so devoted in doing that, he was so committed in doing that, I got into one of the top middle schools in Beijing. So he said, whatever that, I did that. It worked. So I think this is how a lot of people practice Buddhism. Like they're not really there for the religion. They're mostly there for the blessings. And so it's really kind of, at least in China, it's become a folk religion. I'm not really sure how it is practiced here in the United States. Yeah, that's another thing that we could, I need to do a little more research. So in the end, I would like to share with you is that I think the reason why we study Buddhism today is not really, we don't want to become Buddhist scholars, and I'm not a Buddhist scholar in any sense. And, many people have told me that near just a couple miles away from our church, there's, a Hindu or Buddhist temple, and we see maybe some of you sitting here today, you have family members who are practicing Buddhism. And I think the idea of us knowing more about Buddhism, it would really help us to build a bridge to understand what they believe, and so that we can bring the gospel to them. So there's just a couple ways that I found what I would normally use, and that I found that is really unique in Christianity, and it would really touch upon the heart of a Buddhist. First of all, I would say this is a key, at least this was a key to my mother's testimony, is that the need for love. Because in Buddhism, really, since you are so focused, dedicated on getting rid of the desires, then you really have a hard time dealing with the term of love. And also, where do you find love from, right? Because the Buddha doesn't love you. He doesn't really love anyone. The reason why he went to pursue nirvana wasn't because of love, but in Christianity, we know where love is from, right? Romans 5:8, yet we were still sinners, that Christ died for us, right? So we really see the love, in the person, right? In the person of Jesus Christ. And if you know Jesus, have a personal relationship, you know you're loved by him. So this is something that really touches Buddhists. It's like, wow, I know that God not only is just a supremely being, but he's a person who loves me. And also, I think we could also talk about the fear of death. As much as China, there's Buddhists in China, China is very, very superstitious. Most Chinese Buddhists are very afraid of death, because really you have no idea where you're going after you die. You don't know how much, if you have done enough good works, right? Have you to earn you a place or earn you a good karma, right? How much good do you really have to do? And what do you do with your bad karmas, right? How do you get rid of it? But we know that in Christ, if I may use the language of karma, that really the bad karmas or the consequences of our bad karmas is fall on Jesus Christ, right? God poured out his wrath on Christ for us, so that we know that we have assurance that we are forgiven. That's one thing we could tell the Buddhists. Hey, you could quit your efforts, you quit your self-efforts and trust in Christ. And the last one I would say is just the purpose of life. Really, because Buddhism is an atheist religion, as much as people have made it kind of a theistic religion. I remember once asking my aunt, it was like, hey, where do you think the world came from, right? If you believe in Buddhism, where do you think, how we got here? Well, no idea. She would just tell me, I don't want to talk about it. Let's talk about something else. Really, there's no answer, because Buddha himself, he admitted in his teachings that he's just a teacher, right? He's just a fine teacher himself. He's not a god, or he's not a supreme being. He holds no power of creation. So really, he doesn't, if you are seeking for the answer of in this life, why you're here and what is the purpose of your life, you can't find that in Buddhism. You can only find that in Christ Jesus, and find that in who he is. So, brothers and sisters, I'm gonna end my lesson here, and I have a video for you, and I'm really grateful for what you all showing up tonight. And let me show you. This is just a video that kind of briefly concludes of what we learned in Buddhism.